Arizona Territory, 1878. The schoolhouse stood empty, dust gathering on desks where eager minds once learned. Miss Elizabeth Harmon packed the last of her meager belongings, the school board's letter of dismissal folded neatly in her pocket. Too progressive, they said. Unsuitable, they claimed. 6 years of dedicated teaching erased with a single stroke of ink. With no family back east and winter approaching, her options dwindled by the hour. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the valley, a tall figure appeared at her door, Chief Maka of the local Apache band, his proud face weathered by sun and struggle. His unexpected words changed everything. Could a woman raised on Jane Austen novels find her place in an Apache family? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years earlier, Elizabeth Harmon had arrived in Copper Springs with 2 trunks, a teaching certificate, and boundless optimism. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously in the dusty main street, the driver pointing toward a weathered building that passed for the town hall. "School board meets there," he'd said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Good luck, miss." Her worn copy of Pride and Prejudice had been tucked into her pocket that day, a talisman of sorts. Now it sat on her bedside table, its pages yellowed and familiar. Elizabeth ran her fingers over the embossed cover, remembering her father reading it aloud during long Boston winters. He'd been the one to encourage her westward journey after his death left her alone in the world. "Go where you're needed, Lizzie," he'd written in his final letter. "Your mother and I will be proud, wherever you land." Copper Springs had needed a teacher, but what they'd wanted was someone pliable. Someone who wouldn't question why the Mexican children sat in the back, or why the few Apache children who ventured to school were expected to forget their language. "You're making trouble where there needn't be any," Mayor Hollister had warned during her first year. "These children know their place. Best you remember yours." Elizabeth had nodded politely and continued teaching every child who entered her classroom with equal attention. She developed a reputation, fair but stubborn, kind but unyielding on matters of principle. Only Abigail Porter, the widowed shopkeeper, had truly welcomed her. Their friendship formed over shared cups of tea and a mutual appreciation for books that gathered dust on Abigail's store shelves, ordered but rarely purchased by the townspeople. "Most folks here can read enough to sign their names and check mining claims," Abigail had explained. "They don't see much use beyond that." Elizabeth had changed some minds over the years. Parents who initially viewed her with suspicion gradually acknowledged their children's progress. Mr. Santiago, who ran the smithy, had tears in his eyes when his daughter Maria read an entire page from Elizabeth's primer without hesitation. "My wife would have been so proud," he'd whispered. But 3 days ago everything had unraveled. Thomas Hollister, the mayor's son, had accused Miguel Yazzie, a half-Apache boy, of stealing his pocketknife. Despite Miguel's protests and Elizabeth's defense, she'd seen Thomas drop the knife near the creek. The school board had seized the opportunity. "Miss Harmon consistently demonstrates an inability to maintain proper order and respect appropriate social boundaries," the dismissal letter stated. Her continued employment would be detrimental to the moral development of Copper Springs youth. The real message was clear. She challenged the natural order once too often. Elizabeth folded the last of her shirtwaists and placed it in her trunk. The small cabin that had served as her home felt hollow now, her books and teaching materials already packed away. She'd planned to leave on tomorrow's eastbound stage, though she had no clear destination. Her meager savings would sustain her only briefly. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Abigail stood on the porch, a basket covered with a checkered cloth in her arms. "I brought supper," she said simply, "and I'm not taking no for an answer." They ate at Elizabeth's small table, cornbread, bean stew, and dried apple tart, as twilight settled over the valley. Neither mentioned Elizabeth's impending departure until the meal was finished. "I've been thinking," Abigail began, her weathered hands cupping a mug of tea. "My sister in Denver might." "I can't impose," Elizabeth interrupted gently. "You've done enough." "Then what will you do?" "Winter's coming, and stages east get unpredictable with the first snow." Elizabeth gazed out the window at the purpling mountains. "I don't know," she admitted. "I thought I'd found my place here." "You deserve better than how they treated you," Abigail said, anger flashing in her normally gentle eyes. "Standing up for that boy was the right thing. And yet here I am, dismissed without reference." Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Apparently doing the right thing isn't always rewarded in this territory." Abigail squeezed her hand. "Get some rest. Things often look different by morning light." But as Elizabeth prepared for bed after Abigail's departure, she doubted the morning would bring any new options. Her life in Copper Springs was ending, and the future stretched before her, as vast and uncertain as the desert beyond the valley. Chief Maka stood at the edge of his people's settlement, watching the sun sink behind the western mountains. The eagle feather secured in his hair moved gently in the evening breeze, a symbol of the leadership he had carried for 15 winters. His people, a small band of western Apache, had been granted this land in an uneasy treaty 5 years ago. Close enough to Copper Springs to trade, far enough to maintain some independence. It was not the vast territory his ancestors had roamed, but it was theirs for now. Maka understood the precarious nature of white men's promises. He had been 12 when government men first came to his father's camp, speaking of education and opportunity. One of 4 boys chosen, he had been sent east to the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. 10 years of having his language beaten from his mouth, his hair shorn, his name changed to Mark. 10 years of straddling 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. When he returned, his father was dead, his mother remarried, and his people diminished. He had brought back reading, writing, mathematics, and a perfect command of English, skills that eventually helped him negotiate for this small parcel of ancestral land when so many others were forced onto distant reservations. "Father," Maka turned to see his eldest son, Nakohi, approaching. At 16, the boy was nearly as tall as Maka, with the same broad shoulders and watchful eyes. But where Maka had learned diplomatic caution, Nakohi burned with the righteous anger of youth. "The hunting party has returned," Nakohi reported. 3 deer. Enough meat for several days." "Good. Your brother." "Reading again." Nakohi's tone conveyed disapproval. "The books you brought from town." Maka nodded. Tarak, his younger son at 12, showed the same curiosity that had once marked Maka's own childhood. But times were different now. The world pressed closer every year. "Knowledge is protection," Maka said quietly. "Go help with the meat." After Nakohi departed, Maka walked through the settlement. 23 dwellings housed his extended family group, cousins, aunts, uncles, the children of old friends. They had adapted their traditional wickiups with lumber and canvas when possible, creating more permanent structures. Not traditional, but practical for their fixed location. His own home stood slightly apart, larger than most to accommodate his position. Empty now of his wife's presence for over a year. Ayana had been strong until the sickness came, the white man's disease that filled her lungs with fluid. Maka had tried everything. Traditional medicine, a doctor from town who took his money but offered little help, prayers to both the Apache creator and the white man's god. Nothing had saved her. Inside his dwelling, Tarak sat cross-legged near the central fire pit, hunched over a book in the fading light. "You will ruin your eyes," Maka said, lighting an oil lamp he'd traded for last winter. Tarak looked up, his face brightening. Unlike his brother, he had their mother's softer features, her curiosity. "This one tells about places across the ocean, father. Islands where people build boats from tree trunks and navigate by stars." Maka sat beside his son, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and concern. Tarak absorbed knowledge like dry earth took water, But such learning brought dangers too. It made the boy different, caught between worlds as Maka had been. The school teacher in town, Tarak said suddenly. I heard she is leaving. Maka kept his expression neutral. Miss Harmon? Yes. Why? She was kind. She gave me a book once, when I went to town with you. The town leaders did not approve of her ways. Maka had observed the young woman over the years. Her determination, her fairness to all children, regardless of origin. Her struggles against the town's prejudices. That is their loss, Tarak said with surprising bitterness. Later, after both sons slept, Maka sat alone by the dying fire. His aunt Nazcha, the oldest member of their band and keeper of stories, joined him silently. You are troubled, she observed after several minutes. My sons need guidance I cannot fully provide, he admitted. Nako he clings to the old ways but must learn to navigate the new world. Tarak embraces new knowledge but needs roots in our traditions. And you need help, Nazcha said matter-of-factly. A man alone raises sons with half a heart. Maka said nothing. His grief for Ayana remained private, carried silently like the weight of his responsibilities. The teacher woman, Nazcha said suddenly, the one who treats all children as worthy. She has nowhere to go now. Maka looked at his aunt sharply. How do you know this? Nazcha smiled. I have ears. The women who trade at the store talk freely, thinking I do not understand. Maka turned to stare into the embers. A plan formed in his mind, unlikely, perhaps impossible, but once conceived, it would not fade. I will ride to her cabin tomorrow, he decided. Elizabeth woke to sunlight streaming through her window. For one disorienting moment, she thought it was an ordinary day. Then the reality of her situation rushed back. No school to open. No children waiting. Her hand brushed against the brass key to the schoolhouse on her bedside table. A possession she should have returned but couldn't bear to part with yet. She dressed simply in a navy skirt and white shirtwaist, her hair pulled back in its usual practical knot. The stage wouldn't leave until tomorrow, giving her one last day to say goodbye to the few people who mattered. As she prepared a simple breakfast, a shadow passed her window. A moment later, a firm knock sounded at her door. Elizabeth frowned, not expecting visitors so early. When she opened the door, she found herself looking up at a tall Apache man. She recognized him immediately, Chief Maka, whose dignified presence she'd noted at town meetings and whose younger son had occasionally lingered at the schoolhouse windows, watching lessons with undisguised interest. Miss Harmon. His English was perfect, with barely a trace of accent. May I speak with you? Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before stepping back. Please come in, Chief Maka. If he was surprised that she knew his name, he didn't show it. He ducked slightly to enter, his presence making her small cabin feel suddenly cramped. He stood awkwardly until she gestured toward the table. Would you like coffee? She offered, falling back on ingrained hospitality. No, thank you. He sat carefully, as if afraid the chair might break under his weight. I will be direct, Miss Harmon. I have a proposal for you. Elizabeth sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. A proposal? I have 2 sons, he began, and several children in our band who need education, real education, not just our traditions. The government school is 3 days ride away, and he paused. They do not teach respect there. Elizabeth nodded, knowing all too well the reputation of distant Indian schools. I am proposing that you come to our settlement and teach, he continued. You would have your own dwelling. You would be treated with respect. You would be safe. Elizabeth stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. You want me to live among your people? To teach your children? Yes. His dark eyes held hers steadily. I have watched you teach for 3 years. You are fair to all children. You respect their minds. Elizabeth stood abruptly, moving to the window. The schoolhouse key pressed against her palm, the metal warm from her grip. Chief Maka, I appreciate your unexpected offer, but there would be difficulties. I don't speak your language. I know little of your customs. The townspeople would never. The townspeople have already shown what they think of you, he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. As for language, many of our young people speak English, and customs can be learned. Elizabeth turned back to him. Why me? Surely there are others. Who would come live among savages? A hint of bitterness colored his words. No, there are not others. I didn't mean. I know. He stood, his height again commanding the small space. Miss Harmon, my people stand between two worlds. The old ways are fading. The new ways would destroy us. We need bridge builders. The simplicity of his assessment struck her. Bridge builders. Wasn't that what she had tried to be in Copper Springs? With limited success. I understand this is sudden, he continued. I will return in 2 days for your answer. Before she could respond, another knock came at the door. Elizabeth opened it to find Abigail, basket in hand. I brought fresh. Abigail stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening at the sight of Chief Maka. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. An awkward silence filled the room until Maka moved toward the door. I was just leaving, Mrs. Porter. Chief Maka has made me an unexpected offer, Elizabeth explained, feeling oddly compelled to break the tension. To teach the children of his band. Abigail's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. I see. Maka paused at the threshold. 2 days, Miss Harmon. Think carefully. He nodded respectfully to both women and departed. Elizabeth closed the door, leaning against it. He wants me to live among his people, Abigail, to teach his sons and other children. Well, Abigail said, setting her basket on the table. That's certainly not what I expected when I brought breakfast. She studied Elizabeth's face. You're actually considering it. It wasn't a question. It's madness, Elizabeth said, more to herself than to Abigail. I know nothing of their ways. Maybe that's not as important as what you do know, Abigail replied thoughtfully. How to teach, how to listen, how to treat people with dignity. Elizabeth clutched the brass key tighter. I have until tomorrow to decide. Morning sunlight streamed through the cabin windows as Elizabeth and Abigail shared a simple breakfast. The older woman's family Bible lay open on the table between them, as it often did during their conversations about difficult choices. I've known Chief Maka for nearly a decade, Abigail said, buttering a slice of bread. He's respected, even by those in town who won't admit it. Educated back east, from what I hear. Yes, his English is impeccable, Elizabeth agreed. But Abigail, living among the Apache? What do I know of their ways? What did you know of frontier life before coming west? Abigail countered. We learn, adapt. It's the way of things out here. Elizabeth traced the worn leather cover of Abigail's Bible. Would it be proper? A white woman alone among them. Abigail's eyes grew distant. Before I married Porter, I lived with a Navajo family for nearly a year. My wagon train was attacked by raiders, not Indians, mind you, but white desperados. A Navajo hunting party found me half dead and took me to their healer. Elizabeth stared in shock. You never told me this. Not something I share in Copper Springs, Abigail said wryly. But they were good people, Elizabeth. Different ways, yes, but decent, honorable. I learned their language, helped with children. When Porter came trading and we took a liking to each other, they gave us their blessing. The revelation shifted something in Elizabeth's thinking. If Abigail, proper, church-going Abigail, had lived among native people and found value there, their contemplation was interrupted by loud voices outside. Elizabeth moved to the window to see Mayor Hollister and 2 other men from the school board approaching her cabin. Speak of the devil, Abigail muttered. Elizabeth smoothed her skirt and opened the door before they could knock. Mayor Hollister. Gentlemen, what brings you here? Hollister's florid face suggested he'd already visited the saloon, despite the early hour. Heard you're leaving tomorrow, Miss Harmon. Came to make sure everything's settled. Quite settled, thank you. Elizabeth maintained her composure, though her heart raced. I've arranged passage on tomorrow's stage. Hollister smirked. Good, good. Though if you're short on funds, I hear Cassie over at the Silver Dollar is looking for help. Pretty gal like you could do well there. The implication was unmistakable. Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. I believe my teaching credentials qualify me for more appropriate employment, Mayor. Teaching credentials. One of the other men, Mr. Peterson, who owned the mercantile, laughed. Lot of good those do when you can't keep proper order. Letting Indian brats mix with decent folks' children. Every child deserves education, Elizabeth said firmly, regardless of background. See, that's the kind of thinking that got you dismissed, Hollister said, wagging a finger at her. Women with progressive ideas don't fare well out here, Miss Harmon. Best remember your place. And what place would that be exactly? Elizabeth asked, her patience wearing thin. Hollister stepped closer, alcohol heavy on his breath. Under the protection and guidance of men who understand this territory. Women who forget that end up in two places, the brothel or the cemetery. That's enough. Abigail appeared beside Elizabeth. You should be ashamed, Hollister, threatening a woman who's done nothing but educate your town's children. Stay out of this, widow, Hollister growled. Your husband's not around to protect you anymore. Something snapped in Elizabeth. I believe you've made your position clear, gentlemen. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have packing to finish. She closed the door firmly in their faces, hands trembling. The nerve, Abigail fumed, to suggest you work at that saloon, as if teaching children wasn't a calling worthy of respect. Elizabeth leaned against the door, listening to the men's retreating footsteps and crude laughter. A strange calm settled over her. They've shown me exactly what I needed to see, Abigail. What's that? That there's no place for me in Copper Springs. No future here for a woman who won't conform to their narrow expectations. Elizabeth moved to the window, gazing toward the distant mountains where the Apache settlement lay. Perhaps Chief Maka's offer deserves more consideration than I first gave it. Later that afternoon, Elizabeth walked to the schoolhouse one last time. The key felt heavy in her hand as she unlocked the door. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light from the windows. She ran her fingers along the desks, remembering the children who had filled this room with questions and laughter. As she turned to leave, she found three mothers waiting silently in the doorway. Mrs. Santiago, Mrs. Coleman, and Mrs. Yazzie, Miguel's mother. We heard you might be going to teach the Apache children, Mrs. Santiago said softly. Is it true? News traveled fast in small towns. I'm considering it, Elizabeth admitted. Good, Mrs. Yazzie said firmly. Our children will have no one now. I'm sorry I couldn't do more, Elizabeth said, the weight of her failure heavy in her chest. You did everything you could, Mrs. Coleman assured her. We were the cowards, not speaking up when the board moved against you. Their quiet words of support followed Elizabeth back to her cabin, where she sat at her small desk and began a list of what she would need if, when, she accepted Chief Maka's offer. The following morning, Elizabeth woke before dawn. She had spent much of the night considering Maka's offer, weighing practicalities against her instincts. By the time the first light crept through her window, her decision was made. She canceled her stage reservation and spent the day sorting her possessions. Books, teaching materials, and personal necessities would come with her. Furniture and household items would be sold or given to Abigail. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking out her window, she saw Chief Maka dismounting from his horse. This time he wasn't alone. A boy, His younger son, she presumed, waited tentatively beside a second horse. Elizabeth opened the door before they reached it. Chief Maka, right on time. He nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Harmon, this is my younger son, Tarak. The boy stepped forward, eyes downcast but clearly curious. Hello, Miss Harmon, he said in careful English. Hello, Tarak. Elizabeth smiled warmly. I believe I've seen you watching through my schoolhouse window occasionally. The boy's eyes widened in surprise before he ducked his head again, a slight smile playing at his lips. Please come in, Elizabeth said, stepping aside. Once seated at her table, she served coffee to Maka while Tarak politely declined, his attention drawn to the books stacked against the wall. You have many books, he observed quietly. Yes, I believe in the power of stories and knowledge, Elizabeth replied. Do you like to read, Tarak? The boy nodded eagerly. Father brings books sometimes from trading trips. I have read Robinson Crusoe 3 times. Maka cleared his throat gently, bringing the conversation back to the matter at hand. Have you considered my proposal, Miss Harmon? Elizabeth folded her hands on the table. I have. Before I give my answer, I need to understand certain things clearly. Maka nodded for her to continue. What exactly would my position be? Would I be free to develop my own teaching methods? Where would I live? And most importantly, would I be free to leave if the arrangement doesn't work for either of us? Maka had clearly anticipated these questions. From inside his vest, he withdrew a folded paper, a simple hand-drawn map of the Apache settlement. You would have this dwelling, he said, pointing to a small square slightly apart from the main cluster, previously used by a healer who has passed on. It is private but close enough for safety. You would teach my sons and any other children whose parents permit it. As for methods, he glanced at his son, who was examining Elizabeth's bookshelf with undisguised interest. I care about results, not methods. Teach them to think, to question, to understand the changing world. And if I find I cannot adapt to your ways, or if your people reject my presence, then you would be free to leave with escort to wherever you wish to go, Maka said simply. I cannot promise my people will all welcome you immediately, but they will respect my decision, and in time, judge you by your actions. Elizabeth studied the map, then raised her eyes to meet Maka's steady gaze. Very well. I accept your offer with one condition. What condition? That your people understand I come as a teacher, not as anything else. A flush rose to her cheeks. My reputation must remain beyond question. Something like amusement flickered in Maka's dark eyes. Of course, Miss Harmon, you will be under my protection but not under my personal attention. Unless invited. The last words were so quiet she almost missed them. When she glanced up sharply, his expression was once again impassive. When would we leave? She asked, moving past the moment. Tomorrow at dawn would be best. The journey takes most of a day. Elizabeth nodded. I'll be ready. The news of Elizabeth's decision spread through Copper Springs like wildfire. By evening, several townspeople had stopped by, some to express concern, others simple curiosity, a few to bid genuine farewells. Mayor Hollister made a more official appearance, flanked by the sheriff. You understand this is madness, he said without preamble. A white woman living among savages? It's indecent. I'm going as a teacher, Mayor Hollister, Elizabeth replied evenly. Just as I came to Copper Springs. If anything happens to you out there, don't expect the town to send help, the sheriff added. You'll be beyond our jurisdiction. I understand the risks, Elizabeth said, and I've made my decision. After they left, Abigail arrived with supper and helped pack the last of Elizabeth's belongings. I'll visit when I can, she promised, embracing Elizabeth tightly. And I've packed some extra supplies, medicines, thread, things you might need. Dawn found Elizabeth waiting on her porch, 2 trunks and several parcels neatly stacked beside her. Chief Maka arrived punctually with Turok and a pack horse for Elizabeth's belongings. As they departed, Elizabeth turned for one last look at the town just waking to a new day, a day that would continue without her. The schoolhouse bell would remain silent. The children would find other ways to fill their days until a new teacher arrived. She felt a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation as they rode east, toward a future she could never have imagined when she first came west. The journey to the Apache settlement took them through landscapes Elizabeth had only glimpsed from the stagecoach window during her initial journey west. They followed no road, only trails visible to Maka's experienced eye, winding through canyons of red stone and across dry washes where Turok pointed out the tracks of deer and coyote. By midday, they stopped in the shade of a cottonwood grove beside a small stream. While the horses drank, Turok shyly offered Elizabeth some dried meat and pine nuts from a pouch at his waist. "Thank you," she said, accepting the simple meal. "Is it much farther?" "We will arrive before sunset," Maka replied, scanning the horizon. "The settlement lies beyond those hills." As they continued, Elizabeth noticed the landscape changing subtly. More pinyon pines appeared, the air grew slightly cooler, and the terrain more varied. They were climbing gradually into the foothills. "My people preferred the mountains before the reservation," Maka explained when she commented on the change. "Higher ground is safer, with more water and game." Late afternoon brought them to a ridge overlooking a sheltered valley. Below, Elizabeth could see the Apache settlement. Not the teepees of her imagination, but a cluster of sturdy dwellings built of wood, stone, and canvas, arranged in a rough circle around a central clearing. Smoke rose from several cooking fires, and children played near a small stream that cut through the valley. "Your new home," Maka said simply. As they descended into the valley, Elizabeth felt dozens of eyes tracking their approach. Women paused in their work, men straightened from tasks, and children gathered to stare openly at the white woman on horseback. In the central clearing, they dismounted. A tall, stern-looking young man approached immediately. Elizabeth recognized Maka's older son from his resemblance to his father, though his face lacked Maka's diplomatic calm. "You actually brought her," he said in Apache to his father, his tone disbelieving. "English Nakohi," Maka replied firmly. "Miss Harmon is our guest and your teacher." Nakohi's dark eyes flashed with barely concealed resentment as he looked Elizabeth up and down. "Welcome," he said, the word carrying no warmth. "Thank you," Elizabeth replied steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "I look forward to working with you, Nakohi." An elderly woman emerged from the gathering crowd, her face deeply lined, her long gray hair braided with colorful beads. She spoke rapidly to Maka in Apache, gesturing occasionally toward Elizabeth. "My aunt, Nazcha," Maka explained. "She asks if you are hungry after the journey. We will eat soon." Elizabeth nodded respectfully to the old woman. "Please tell her I'm grateful for her hospitality," Maka translated, which prompted a grunt and sharp response from Nazcha. "What did she say?" Elizabeth asked when Maka hesitated. "She says if you are to live among us, you should learn to speak for yourself," he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Turok eagerly took charge of showing Elizabeth to her dwelling, a small, surprisingly sturdy cabin set slightly apart from the others. Its previous occupant had been a healer, he explained, leading her inside. The single room was clean but sparse. A bed frame with a new-looking mattress stuffed with something aromatic, a small table with 2 chairs, shelves along one wall, and a stone fireplace. "We fixed it for you," Turok said proudly. "I helped make the table." "It's perfect," Elizabeth said, genuinely touched by the effort. A far cry from Boston comforts, but more solid than she had expected. Men brought her trunks and parcels while Elizabeth explored her new home. A small window covered with oiled paper let in light. The roof seemed sound. There was even a hook for a wash basin and a small mirror on the wall. "You will join us for evening meal," Maka said from the doorway. It wasn't a question. The communal meal proved to be Elizabeth's first real challenge. Seated cross-legged around a central fire with Maka's family, she struggled to follow proper etiquette. Should she wait to be served? Take food directly from the cooking pots? The stares of the gathered Apache made her fingers clumsy. Nazca solved the dilemma by forcefully placing a wooden bowl in Elizabeth's hands and gesturing to the various pots. Tarak whispered explanations of unfamiliar dishes: stewed meat with chiles, roasted roots, some kind of cake made with ground seeds and berries. Nakohi watched her with barely disguised contempt as she cautiously tasted each item. "Do you find our food suitable, teacher?" he asked, his English precise but cold. "It's quite good," Elizabeth replied honestly. "Different from what I'm accustomed to, but flavorful." "Perhaps you brought white people's food with you?" His challenge was clear. "Nakohi," Maka warned quietly. "I brought tea and some books," Elizabeth said calmly. "I expect to adapt to your ways while I'm here, not the other way around." Something in her direct response seemed to surprise the young man. He said nothing more, but his hostile gaze remained fixed on her throughout the meal. That night, alone in her cabin, Elizabeth lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Coyotes in the distance, the wind through pine needles, occasional voices speaking in Apache. Doubt crept in with the darkness. What had she done? How could she possibly bridge such different worlds? The small wooden schoolhouse table Tarak had proudly shown her stood in the corner, waiting for its first lesson. She focused on that, the familiar purpose of teaching, until sleep finally claimed her. Elizabeth's first proper teaching day began with Tarak's eager arrival at her cabin, followed by a reluctant Nakohi. To her surprise, 3 other children trailed behind them, 2 girls around 10 years old and a boy perhaps 7 or 8. "These are your students also," Tarak explained. "Their parents wish them to learn English and numbers." Maka had provided no curriculum, no guidance beyond his trust in her methods. Elizabeth fell back on experience, beginning with simple assessments of what each child already knew. Tarak's English was good, his reading skills developing nicely. Nakohi spoke and understood well but refused to demonstrate reading abilities, though Elizabeth suspected he possessed them. The other children knew only a few English words, watching her with wide, curious eyes. By midday, Elizabeth had established a tentative routine, using objects and pictures to connect English words with their Apache equivalents. Tarak eagerly assisted, taking pride in translating. Over the following week, her class grew to 8 children. She taught in the open air when weather permitted, using her small table as a desk. The children sat on blankets spread on the ground, eager despite the language barrier. Only Nakohi remained aloof, attending only because his father insisted. His resistance was palpable in every reluctant answer, every challenging stare. "Why do we need English books?" he demanded during the second week. "Our stories are spoken, remembered, not trapped in marks on paper. Books let us share knowledge across great distances," Elizabeth explained patiently. "They connect us to people we may never meet. Connect us to white people who take our land," he countered. Elizabeth considered this. "Knowledge is like a weapon, Nakohi. Would you rather face an enemy armed or unarmed?" Something flickered in his eyes, not acceptance, but perhaps consideration. It was a small victory. Elizabeth's integration into the community progressed unevenly. She made efforts to learn basic Apache phrases, much to the children's amusement. She observed the women's work, basket weaving, food preparation, tending to small gardens of corn, beans, and squash. One afternoon, attempting to be helpful, Elizabeth gathered what she thought were wild herbs near her cabin. She was adding them to a stew when Nazca appeared suddenly, slapping the plants from her hand with a torrent of Apache words. "What did I do wrong?" Elizabeth asked, confused and embarrassed as several women watched the interaction. Nazcha spoke rapidly to a young woman nearby, who translated haltingly, "Those plants, not for eating, for ceremonial use. Only. Very disrespectful." Elizabeth felt her face grow hot with shame. "Please tell her I meant no disrespect. I didn't know." That evening, Maka visited her cabin. "I heard about the plants," he said without preamble. "I was trying to adapt," Elizabeth explained, embarrassed. "I didn't understand their significance." "Our ways are not written in books," Maka said. "This is why Nakohi resists you. He fears what will be lost when our children learn to value paper knowledge over lived knowledge." "I don't want them to lose their traditions," Elizabeth insisted. "Can't they have both?" "Perhaps, if they are taught with care." Maka studied her for a moment. "The plants you gathered are used in healing ceremonies. They represent the bridge between this world and the spirit world. To use them as common food would be like—" He searched for an equivalent. "Like using pages from your Bible to wrap fish." Understanding dawned. "I see. I should have asked before assuming." Maka nodded. "Among my people, knowledge is earned, not simply given. You must show you are worthy of learning our ways." The next morning, Elizabeth found Nazcha waiting outside her cabin. Without speaking, the older woman handed her a partially completed basket and motioned for Elizabeth to follow. They spent the day together by the stream, Nazcha demonstrating the intricate weaving technique, correcting Elizabeth's clumsy attempts with firm hands. No English was spoken, but a form of communication developed through gesture, expression, and the shared focus of their work. By late afternoon, Elizabeth had completed a small, imperfect basket. Nazcha examined it critically, then gave a single nod of approval. The following day, Nazcha returned, this time with materials for a different pattern. As they worked, the older woman began to speak, pointing to objects and saying their names in Apache, waiting expectantly for Elizabeth to repeat them. "She is teaching you," Tarak observed when he came for his lesson and found them working together. "This is a great honor. Nazcha knows many old ways." Elizabeth's days fell into a new rhythm. Mornings teaching the children, afternoons learning from Nazcha. The basket weaving sessions gradually expanded to include other skills. Identifying edible plants, preparing traditional foods, understanding the uses of different materials. Word spread through the settlement. Other women began to watch, then participate, correcting Elizabeth's pronunciation or demonstrating better techniques. Their initial reserve thawed slightly in the face of her genuine efforts. Only Nakohi remained skeptical, watching from a distance as Elizabeth gradually found small footholds in the community. "Learning to weave baskets doesn't make you one of us," he said bluntly when he found her practicing alone. "No," Elizabeth agreed. "Just as learning English doesn't make you white. But understanding each other's ways might help us all survive what's coming." "And what is coming, teacher?" he asked, his voice edged with bitterness. Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "Change, Nakohi. Unstoppable change. The question isn't whether it will come, but how we face it." For once, he had no quick retort as autumn deepened. Elizabeth found her footing more securely in the Apache community. Her daily lessons expanded beyond basic reading and arithmetic to include natural sciences. Using the surrounding environment as a classroom, the children collected leaves, rocks, and insects, which Elizabeth helped them classify and describe in both English and Apache. Tarak especially thrived under her guidance. His natural curiosity, coupled with a quick mind, made him an eager student. One afternoon, after the other children had left, he presented Elizabeth with several folded papers. "I made this," he said, a mixture of pride and uncertainty in his voice. "A story, like in your books." Elizabeth unfolded the pages to find a carefully written tale about an eagle who befriended a fish, complete with simple illustrations. The English was imperfect but clear, the narrative surprisingly sophisticated for a boy his age. "This is wonderful, Tarak," she said, genuinely impressed. "You've created a fable with a moral, just like Aesop." "Who is Aesop?" he asked eagerly. That question launched a new dimension to their lessons. Elizabeth began sharing classic fables and stories, encouraging Tarak to compare them with traditional Apache tales. He took to writing with remarkable enthusiasm, filling pages with stories that blended elements from both traditions. Maka occasionally observed these lessons, standing quietly at the edge of the clearing. He never interfered, but Elizabeth grew increasingly aware of his presence, his watchful assessment of her methods. One evening, as she walked back to her cabin after the day's teaching, Maka fell into step beside her. "My son has always loved stories," he said. His mother would create tales for him each night. Since her passing, he has been hungry for them. "He has genuine talent," Elizabeth replied. "His mind connects ideas in unusual ways. The written word is powerful magic," Maka acknowledged. "But I worry about the balance. Our people's stories live in the telling, changing with each speaker, alive in the breath. Once captured on paper, do they lose something essential?" The question wasn't hostile but genuinely philosophical. Elizabeth considered it carefully. "Perhaps they gain something too," she suggested. "Permanence, a way to survive even if—" She stopped, realizing the implication. "Even if our way of life does not," Maka finished softly. "Yes, this is the dilemma we face." They had reached her cabin. In the golden light of sunset, Elizabeth saw not just the chief but the man, the weight he carried, the difficult balance he maintained between tradition and survival. "Would you like to see some of Tarak's writing?" she offered impulsively. His eyes widened slightly at the invitation. "I would." They sat at her small table while Elizabeth showed him Tarak's stories. As Maka read, his expression softened with pride and perhaps a touch of wonder. "He has his mother's imagination," he murmured. Their conversation flowed easily from there, about teaching methods, about the different children's aptitudes, about books Maka had encountered during his education. Elizabeth was surprised by his knowledge of literature, his thoughtful perspectives on writers from Shakespeare to Emerson. "You've read widely," she observed. "Knowledge of the enemy is survival," he said, then smiled slightly. "Though I found beauty in many white men's words, not just threat." As darkness fell, he rose to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Thank you, Miss Harmon." "For what?" "For seeing my son clearly. For teaching without breaking." The moment felt significant. A small bridge formed between them. 2 days later, Nakohi left with several other young men for a hunting expedition into the mountains. His absence created a palpable easing of tension in Elizabeth's lessons. The remaining children, including Tarak, seemed to breathe more freely, participate more openly. Elizabeth used the opportunity to introduce new material, including simple geography. She drew maps in the dirt, explaining the wider world beyond their territory. The children were fascinated by concepts of oceans and distant countries. As Elizabeth's 4th week among the Apache drew to a close, Abigail arrived for a promised visit, bringing supplies and news from town. The children watched in fascination as the 2 white women embraced. "You look different," Abigail observed, studying Elizabeth's sun-darkened skin and simpler clothing. "I feel different," Elizabeth admitted. They were sharing tea in Elizabeth's cabin when shouts erupted from the settlement. Elizabeth hurried outside to find 3 men on horseback at the edge of the clearing. Townsmen from Copper Springs, including Peterson from the Mercantile. "There she is," one called, pointing. "Told you she was here." Maka emerged from his dwelling, his posture alert but controlled. "What brings you to our land?" he asked in perfect English. "Came to check on Miss Harmon," Peterson slurred, clearly intoxicated. "Make sure she ain't being held against her will by you savages." Elizabeth stepped forward. As you can see, Mr. Peterson, I'm perfectly fine. Please leave. You're trespassing. Trespassing. The man laughed harshly. Listen to her, boys. Gone native already. Talking about Indian land like it's real property. You will leave now, Maka said, his voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority. Several Apache men had appeared, forming a loose circle around the intruders. Or what? Peterson challenged, hand moving to his belt where a pistol was holstered. Or you will be escorted back to town, Maka replied evenly. Without violence, if you choose wisely. The tension stretched like a wire between them until Abigail stepped forward. Ernest Peterson, your wife will tan your hide if you don't get back to mind the store, she said firmly. And the rest of you should be ashamed, disturbing peaceful folks and making fools of yourselves. Something in her familiar scolding tone seemed to deflate the men. With a few more muttered threats, they wheeled their horses around and departed. As the dust settled, Elizabeth realized the entire settlement was watching her. Not with the previous wariness, but with something new. In standing with Maka against the townsmen, she had crossed some invisible line. She was no longer merely a visitor but someone who had chosen sides. That evening, for the first time, women brought food to her cabin, inviting her to share their meal rather than simply tolerating her presence. The arrival of a breathless messenger disrupted the calm routine Elizabeth had established. The young Apache man spoke rapidly to Maka, who listened with growing stillness, a tension Elizabeth had come to recognize as concern carefully controlled. Later that evening, Maka explained the news. A detachment of U.S. cavalry was moving through the territory, ostensibly tracking renegade Apaches from a different band who had reportedly raided a stagecoach line to the south. Will they come here? Elizabeth asked, immediately thinking of her students. Likely. They will want to ensure we are peacefully on our assigned land, Maka replied, a hint of bitterness in his otherwise measured tone. An officer and several soldiers will visit, count our people, inspect our weapons. Is there danger? There is always danger when blue coats come, he said simply. But we have our treaty paper. And now we have you. Me? Elizabeth asked, confused. A white teacher living willingly among savages presents a certain complication to their usual narrative. 3 days later, the cavalry arrived. An officer with lieutenant's bars, a sergeant and 6 privates, all mounted on dusty horses and armed with rifles. Elizabeth watched from her cabin as Maka went to meet them, his posture straight, his manner dignified but carefully deferential. The lieutenant dismounted, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy that nonetheless failed to mask his condescension. Chief Maka, I trust your people remain peaceful and contained to your designated lands. Of course, Lieutenant Davis, Maka replied smoothly. We are farmers and hunters now, as you can see. We've had reports of Apache raiders striking the Silver City stage line, the officer continued. Know anything about that? The Mescalero bands to the south are not my people, Maka explained patiently. We have different languages, different customs. We do not communicate. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. Apache is Apache to most folks. Most folks are mistaken, Maka replied evenly. Elizabeth could see the conversation deteriorating. She smoothed her skirt and walked purposefully toward the men. Good afternoon, Lieutenant, she said brightly. I'm Elizabeth Harmon, the teacher for this settlement. The officer's shock was almost comical. A white woman? Here. He looked from Elizabeth to Maka with sudden suspicion. Are you being held against your will, ma'am? Certainly not, Elizabeth replied firmly. Chief Maka hired me to teach the children English, mathematics, and sciences. I'm here entirely by choice. The lieutenant studied her, disbelief evident. This is most irregular. How long have you been here? Nearly 2 months now. I was previously the schoolteacher in Copper Springs, but the position was eliminated. The sergeant had dismounted and was examining a paper, A copy of the letter Maka had received from an officer commanding Fort Apache, Elizabeth realized. It was addressed formally to Chief Mark of the Aravaipa Apache Band, using the anglicized name from Maka's school days. "Your presence here requires explanation, Miss Harmon," the lieutenant insisted. "I'll need to document this in my report." "By all means," Elizabeth said pleasantly. "Would you care to observe one of our lessons? The children are quite accomplished already." The officer seemed thrown by her calm demeanor. He glanced at Maka, who maintained a carefully neutral expression, then back to Elizabeth. "That won't be necessary. However, I must speak with you privately." Maka tensed almost imperceptibly, but Elizabeth nodded. "Of course, we can talk in my cabin." Once inside, the lieutenant's professional demeanor slipped. "Miss Harmon, whatever your reason for being here, you should know these people cannot be trusted. The Apache are notorious for living on land coveted by miners and ranchers." Elizabeth interrupted. "For defending their homes? Or perhaps for having the audacity to expect treaties to be honored?" The lieutenant's face reddened. "You sound like one of those Eastern sympathizers. The reality out here is different. I've lived in this territory for 3 years, Lieutenant. I'm well aware of the reality. The reality is that these people have been peaceful, have honored their agreements, and ask only to be left alone to raise their children and maintain their way of life. The army has orders." "Yes, I imagine it does," Elizabeth said. "But as you can see, there are no raiders here. Just families." The lieutenant studied her, obviously reassessing. "Your presence will be noted in my report. The Indian agent should be informed. There are regulations about white civilians living among the tribes." "I answer to no Indian agent," Elizabeth replied calmly. "I am an independent teacher employed by Chief Maka. If there are official concerns, I would be happy to address them through proper channels." The officer left her cabin looking unsettled. Elizabeth watched through her window as he conferred with the sergeant, occasionally glancing toward her or Maka. Finally, he remounted his horse. "We'll be moving on," he announced, "but we'll be back this way within the month. Any problems, any disturbances, and this whole band could be relocated to the San Carlos Reservation." The threat hung in the air as the soldiers departed in a cloud of dust. That evening, Maka invited Elizabeth to attend the tribal council meeting, the first time she had been included in such deliberations. The elders gathered in the largest dwelling, sitting in a circle around the fire. To Elizabeth's surprise, Maka indicated she should sit near him, not at the periphery. The council spoke in Apache, but Maka occasionally translated key points for her benefit. The cavalry's visit had crystallized the precarious nature of their situation. Their right to remain on this land contingent on the whims of distant officials and local commanders. The lieutenant's letter mentions unauthorized white presence. Maka translated from the document. "Meaning you, will my being here cause trouble for your people?" Elizabeth asked, suddenly concerned. Nazcha spoke up in halting English, surprising Elizabeth, who hadn't realized the older woman understood so much. "You stay. You are protection now." Elizabeth looked questioningly at Maka. "They will hesitate to move against a settlement with a white teacher," he explained. "It complicates their narrative of savage Apaches. But it also brings scrutiny." As the council continued, Elizabeth gained new understanding of the delicate diplomatic balance Maka maintained, not just with white authorities but with different factions within his own band. Some argued for deeper isolation, others for strategic engagement with the changing world. When Elizabeth returned to her cabin that night, she saw her role with new clarity. She wasn't just teaching children to read. She was part of Maka's larger strategy for his people's survival. The first snow came earlier than Elizabeth expected, dusting the pinyon pines and transforming the settlement overnight. The children arrived for lessons wrapped in blankets, their breath forming clouds in the crisp morning air. Teaching outdoors became impossible, prompting Maka to offer the use of the council dwelling during daylight hours. Elizabeth's small cabin, with its stone fireplace, remained snug against the winter chill. She had learned to bank coals properly, to conserve precious firewood, to layer blankets woven from rabbit fur for warmth. Simple skills that now seemed as essential as reading had once been. "You adapt well," Nascha observed one afternoon as they worked inside Elizabeth's cabin, the older woman showing her how to incorporate dyed porcupine quills into a special ceremonial basket. Their communication had evolved into a mixture of English and Apache, supplemented by gestures and expressions. "I have good teachers," Elizabeth replied, carefully placing a red quill in the pattern. Nascha snorted, which Elizabeth had learned was her way of accepting a compliment. "Soon you will need husband. Winter is long." Elizabeth nearly stabbed herself with a quill. That's not why I'm here, Nascha." The old woman's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I see how you watch my nephew, how he watches you when he thinks no one sees. Chief Maka and I have a professional relationship," Elizabeth insisted, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "He hired me to teach. Nascha continued weaving, a small smile playing at her lips. "Teaching happens in many ways." That evening, as if summoned by the conversation, Maka invited Elizabeth to share the evening meal in his dwelling. This had become a weekly occurrence, an opportunity to discuss the children's progress and any concerns about the settlement. Usually Tarak and Nakohi joined them, but tonight, Maka explained, his sons were participating in a coming-of-age ritual with other young men. The atmosphere felt different without the boys present. Maka seemed less formal, more at ease as he served a stew of rabbit and wild onions. "The cavalry has not returned," Elizabeth observed, accepting a cup of pine needle tea. Lieutenant Davis filed his report. "For now, we are satisfactorily peaceful." Maka's tone carried subtle irony. "Your presence was noted. There may be a visit from an Indian agent eventually. I'll be ready if that happens." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Maka spoke again. "You have been here almost 3 months. The cold season has just begun. If you wish to return to town before winter deepens, arrangements could be made." The suggestion startled Elizabeth. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," he answered quickly, then more deliberately, "No. The children are learning well. You have become part of our community." Elizabeth considered his words. It was true. She had found a place here that felt increasingly natural. The daily rhythms of the settlement, once so foreign, now structured her life. She knew which women made the best cornmeal cakes, which elders told the most captivating stories, which children needed extra patience or encouragement. "I have no desire to leave," she said simply. Relief flickered across Maka's usually composed features. He reached for a small wooden box beside the fire and opened it, revealing a book, a worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said. "It has been many years since I read it, but I remember finding wisdom in its pages." Elizabeth accepted the book with surprise. "You've read Thoreau?" "At school in Pennsylvania. The teachers thought his ideas about simple living would inspire us savages to embrace civilization." Maka's mouth quirked in a rare smile. "I think they misunderstood both Thoreau and us." This glimpse of dry humor delighted Elizabeth. "I'd love to know what you thought of it." Their conversation flowed more freely then, moving from literature to philosophy, from education to the nature of progress. Maka revealed a depth of thought and breadth of knowledge that both surprised and impressed her. He had read not just American authors but European philosophers, forming his own careful analysis of Western ideas. "How did you maintain this knowledge?" she asked. "Living so far from libraries and academic discussion? I traded for books when possible, asked questions of travelers, thought deeply about what I had learned." He stared into the fire. Understanding the white man's mind seemed essential to protecting my people. And now I wonder if understanding alone is enough. His dark eyes met hers. That is why your work with the children matters. They must have tools to shape their own futures. The simple statement carried such trust that Elizabeth felt momentarily humbled. I hope I'm worthy of that responsibility. You are. The certainty in his voice warmed her more than the fire. As the evening lengthened, they shared stories of their pasts. Elizabeth speaking of her father's library in Boston, Maka recounting hunting trips with his father before being sent away to school. When she finally rose to leave, the connection between them felt altered, deepened beyond their formal roles. At her door, Maka paused. Tomorrow is the autumn ceremony. The community would welcome your presence. I'd be honored, Elizabeth replied. That night, she opened the borrowed copy of Walden, finding handwritten notes in the margins. Maka's thoughts from years ago, insights both critical and appreciative of Thoreau's perspectives. His younger self speaking to her across time, revealing a mind that had always questioned, always sought to reconcile different worlds. Elizabeth fell asleep with the book on her chest, dreaming of two people from different worlds sitting beside a pond, sharing a single cup of tea in the quiet moments before sleep each night. Elizabeth had taken to writing in a small leather-bound journal, a gift from her father years ago. What had begun as practical observations about teaching methods and cultural differences had gradually evolved into more personal reflections. I find myself watching for him, she wrote one evening, the words feeling like a confession even in the privacy of her journal. When Maka enters a gathering, something in me grows still, attentive. This is not what I came here for, not what I expected. Yet I cannot deny the respect has become something more, a connection I've never experienced before. She closed the journal quickly when a knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found Abigail stamping snow from her boots, her cheeks red with cold. Surprise, Abigail called, embracing Elizabeth tightly. The trading party said the pass was still clear, so I thought I'd visit before the heavy snows. I'm so glad you did, Elizabeth said warmly, helping her friend with her heavy coat. How was the journey? Cold but uneventful. That young man Nakohi escorted me from the valley entrance. Not the friendliest guide, but certainly vigilant. Elizabeth prepared tea while Abigail unpacked her saddlebags. Coffee, sugar, letters from back east that had arrived for Elizabeth, and several newspapers. You look different again, Abigail observed, studying Elizabeth across the steaming cups. Different how? Elizabeth asked, self-consciously touching her hair, which she now often wore in a simple braid. Settled, Abigail decided. When you first came to Copper Springs, you had a certain tension, always trying to prove yourself. Now you seem comfortable in your own skin. Elizabeth considered this. I suppose I am. Here I'm valued for what I can contribute. My ideas aren't dismissed simply because I'm a woman. And Chief Maka? Abigail asked with deliberate casualness. How do you find working with him? Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's a remarkable man, educated, thoughtful, carrying tremendous responsibility for his people. Abigail murmured, eyes twinkling, and handsome too, in a stern sort of way. Abigail, Elizabeth protested, embarrassed but unable to deny the observation. Oh, don't look so scandalized. I'm too old to pretend not to notice these things. Abigail patted Elizabeth's hand. Besides, I've seen how the people here respect you. You've found a place for yourself. Later, Abigail accompanied Elizabeth to observe the children's lessons in the council dwelling. Tarak proudly demonstrated his reading progress, while the younger children sang a counting song Elizabeth had taught them. They adore you, Abigail commented as they walked back through the settlement. It reminds me of how the children in town used to look at you. I miss them, Elizabeth admitted. Especially Miguel and Maria. They miss you too. The new teacher is... Abigail hesitated. Let's just say he has very traditional views on education. Lots of memorization, strict discipline. Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the edge of the settlement. Elizabeth recognized Nakohi's voice, raised in alarm. Running toward the commotion, they found him supporting Turok, whose leg was bleeding profusely through torn leggings. What happened? Elizabeth asked, immediately examining the wound. Hunting practice, Nakohi explained tersely. The knife slipped. Elizabeth led them to her cabin, where she kept a small medical kit. Lay him on the bed, she instructed, quickly gathering clean cloths and her supplies. The cut was deep but clean, slicing across Turok's thigh. The boy remained stoically silent, though his face had gone pale beneath his bronze skin. Abigail, heat water, Elizabeth directed, falling into the calm efficiency she'd developed during schoolyard accidents. Nakohi, hold this cloth firmly against the wound. As Elizabeth prepared to clean and stitch the wound, Maka arrived, his face tight with concern. How bad? He asked, kneeling beside his son. Deep but clean, Elizabeth explained. I can stitch it, but it will be painful. Maka nodded, then spoke softly to Turok in Apache. The boy visibly relaxed. What did you tell him? Elizabeth asked as she threaded a needle. That his ancestors endured worse without crying out, Maka replied, and that you have gentle hands. The stitching proceeded with Maka holding his son steady, murmuring encouragement. Turok flinched but made no sound as Elizabeth worked, closing the wound with neat, even stitches. You have done this before, Maka observed. Schoolyard accidents, Elizabeth explained, though nothing quite this serious. When she finished, Abigail helped her apply a salve of honey and clean bandages. Nakohi, who had watched the entire procedure with barely concealed anxiety, finally spoke. It was my fault, he admitted. I was teaching him too advanced a technique. He will heal, Maka assured him, and learn from this. As they prepared to move Turok to his own dwelling, Nazca arrived with several other women, carrying pouches of herbs and medicines. They examined Elizabeth's work with professional interest, speaking rapidly in Apache. They approve of your stitching, Maka translated, but wish to apply their own medicines as well. Is this acceptable? Of course, Elizabeth agreed immediately. I believe in combining approaches. This statement, translated by Maka, earned her approving nods from the women. Nazca gestured for Elizabeth to watch as she prepared a poultice of crushed herbs, explaining through gestures and the few Apache words Elizabeth understood. That evening, after Turok had been settled in his bed with both Western bandages and traditional medicines, Maka returned to Elizabeth's cabin. I wish to thank you, he said simply. Your knowledge and quick action may have saved my son from fever or worse. Anyone would have helped, Elizabeth demurred. Perhaps, but not everyone would have respected our ways enough to welcome Nazca's medicines alongside their own. Maka's dark eyes held hers. You continue to surprise me, Elizabeth Harmon. It was the first time he had used her given name. The intimacy of it lingered in the air between them. I've learned that wisdom comes in many forms, she replied softly. He nodded, seeming about to say more, then thought better of it. Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Maka. After he left, Elizabeth returned to her journal. Today, she wrote, I realized that my heart has already decided what my mind is still considering. I belong here now, in ways I never belonged in Copper Springs. Or perhaps even Boston. Winter settled fully upon the mountains, transforming the Apache settlement into a landscape of pristine white, broken only by the smoke of cooking fires and daily activities. Elizabeth had adapted to the rhythms of the cold season, rising before dawn to rekindle her fire, teaching in the council dwelling during the short daylight hours, and spending evenings with various families, gradually improving her Apache language skills. Tarak's leg had healed well, leaving only a thin scar that he displayed with boyish pride. Even Nakohi had warmed slightly toward Elizabeth after the incident, occasionally joining the evening discussions about history and geography that had become a regular feature in Maka's dwelling. The isolation of winter had created a bubble of normalcy that Elizabeth had come to treasure, which made the arrival of strangers all the more jarring. They came at midday, 2 white men on horseback, escorted by 4 cavalry soldiers. From her position in the council dwelling, where she was teaching the children about simple machines, Elizabeth saw the community's instant transformation. Women gathered children, men casually positioned themselves near weapons, and Maka emerged from his dwelling with the dignified bearing that marked his interactions with officials. "Continue the lesson," Elizabeth instructed the older children before stepping outside. She recognized Lieutenant Davis among the soldiers, his pinched expression suggesting the visit was not routine. Beside him sat a thin man in a black coat, clutching an official-looking leather portfolio. "Miss Harmon," Lieutenant Davis acknowledged her with evident disapproval. "Still here, I see." "Yes," she replied simply, moving to stand near Maka. "May I ask the purpose of this visit?" The thin man dismounted awkwardly, nearly losing his balance in the snow. "Harold Wiggins, Bureau of Indian Affairs," he announced, brushing at his coat. "I've come to discuss important matters with Chief Mark and to investigate reports of irregular arrangements." Maka's face remained impassive, but Elizabeth felt the tension radiating from him. "We welcome you to our council dwelling," he said formally. "The weather is not suitable for outdoor discussions." Inside, with the children dismissed, Wiggins arranged papers on the small table Elizabeth used for teaching. The cavalry officers remained standing near the entrance while several Apache elders, including Nazcha, joined the gathering. "I'll be direct," Wiggins began, adjusting his spectacles. "The Department of Indian Affairs has reviewed the status of scattered Apache bands throughout the territory. In the interest of more efficient administration and proper civilization efforts, a consolidation has been ordered." "Consolidation," Maka repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Wiggins extracted an official letter bearing several seals and signatures. "This band is to be relocated to the San Carlos Reservation, effective within 60 days. A murmur ran through the assembled Apache. Elizabeth felt her stomach clench. "This land was granted to us by treaty," Maka said, each word measured. "We have fulfilled every condition. We farm. We trade peacefully. We cause no trouble. Treaties are subject to review, Chief Mark," Wiggins replied dismissively. "The San Carlos Reservation offers proper facilities for industrial training, Christian education, and medical care, all essential to the civilization process." "We do not need civilization," Nazcha said suddenly in her halting English. "We need our home." Wiggins barely glanced at the elderly woman. "Progress requires sacrifice, madam. The scattered bands must be consolidated for proper management." "You mean for the convenience of the army and the appetites of miners and ranchers," Elizabeth interjected, unable to contain herself. Wiggins turned to her with evident distaste. "Which brings me to the other matter. Your presence here, Miss Harmon, is highly irregular and legally questionable. Cohabitation with Indians is, in many territories, explicitly forbidden. I am a teacher, Mr. Wiggins, employed by Chief Maka to educate the children of this community. There is nothing improper about my arrangement. Without proper authorization from the Bureau, any such employment is invalid," Wiggins sniffed. "Furthermore, your presence undermines the authority of government schools established specifically for Indian education." Lieutenant Davis stepped forward. "There have been rumors in town, Miss Harmon, concerning the nature of your relationship with the Indians." Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, more from anger than embarrassment. "What exactly are you implying, Lieutenant?" "The moral standing of a single white woman living among savages is naturally suspect," Wiggins cut in. For your own protection and reputation, I would strongly advise returning to civilization immediately. Maka, who had been studying the official letter, finally spoke. This document mentions available land at San Carlos. Available because you have crowded many different tribes together, enemies forced to live side by side. Disease, hunger, and violence are the results. I have reports from relatives. Exaggerations, Wiggins dismissed. San Carlos is a model reservation with proper Christian oversight. Where is your Christian compassion? Elizabeth demanded. These people have built homes here. They grow crops. The children are learning. Moving them now in winter would cause needless suffering. Hence the 60-day time frame, Wiggins replied stiffly. Most generous, I assure you. Many bands receive far less notice. Elizabeth looked to Maka, hoping for one of his diplomatic solutions, but saw something in his eyes she'd never witnessed before. A momentary flash of helplessness quickly masked by his usual composure. We will require time to consider this directive, Maka said finally, and to consult with legal advisors. Wiggins gathered his papers. Consider all you wish, but the decision is final. I'll return in 30 days to begin preparation for the transfer. He turned to Elizabeth. As for you, Miss Harmon, I strongly suggest you depart with us today. Your presence complicates an already difficult situation. I will remain with my students, Elizabeth replied firmly. Then understand that you do so without legal standing, Wiggins warned. When this band is relocated, you will have no claim to accompany them to San Carlos. That reservation is restricted to authorized personnel only. After the officials departed, a pall fell over the settlement. The council meeting that followed was conducted entirely in Apache, too rapid and emotional for Elizabeth to follow. She sat quietly, understanding that her presence was tolerated only because of Maka's insistence. Later, in his dwelling, Maka translated the key points. The options were grim. Comply with the relocation order, fight it through legal means with little hope of success, flee into the mountains with winter still gripping the land, or resist and face military force. What will you do? Elizabeth asked softly. Maka stared into the fire. I do not know yet, but I know what I will not do. I will not lead my people to San Carlos to die of disease and despair a week after Wiggins' unwelcome visit. Elizabeth sat with Turok reviewing his latest writing, a carefully crafted retelling of an Apache creation story. Despite the cloud of uncertainty hanging over the settlement, she had insisted on maintaining their regular lessons, providing at least some semblance of normalcy for the children. This is excellent work, Turok, she said, genuinely impressed by his growing command of written English. Your descriptions make the story come alive. The boy beamed at her praise, then hesitated. Miss Elizabeth, if we go to this San Carlos place, will you come with us? The question struck her like a physical blow. That's not decided yet, Turok. Your father is exploring many options. But you would want to come? He pressed, his dark eyes suddenly vulnerable. Before Elizabeth could answer, Nazcha appeared at the council dwelling entrance. Rider coming, she announced. White woman. Elizabeth stepped outside to see Abigail approaching on horseback, accompanied by 2 Apache men who had obviously escorted her from the valley entrance. Despite the circumstances, Elizabeth felt a surge of relief at the sight of her friend. I came as soon as I heard, Abigail explained after dismounting. News of the relocation order is all over town. They retreated to Elizabeth's cabin, where Abigail warmed herself by the fire. The situation in town is tense, she reported. Some are pleased at the prospect of the Apache leaving, especially those with eyes on this land for mining or grazing. Others think it unnecessary cruelty, particularly in winter. Can anything be done? Elizabeth asked, pouring tea for them both. That's partly why I came. These arrived for you. Abigail withdrew a bundle of letters from her bag. 3 from Boston, forwarded through Denver. They've been trying to reach you for months. Elizabeth examined the envelopes with surprise. The return address showed her father's cousin, Howard Bennett, a lawyer she barely remembered meeting as a child. The first letter, dated 5 months earlier, informed her that her father's childless brother, Uncle William, had passed away. The second, sent 3 months ago, explained that after lengthy legal proceedings, Elizabeth had been identified as the sole heir to her uncle's modest estate, a small townhouse in Boston and investments yielding approximately $800 annually. The third letter, most recent, expressed increasing concern at her silence and warned that if she did not respond within 6 months of the original notification, the inheritance would be redirected to charitable causes according to the will's secondary provisions. "This is unexpected," Elizabeth murmured, calculations already forming in her mind. $800 annually was not wealth, but it represented independence, freedom from the need to teach for survival. "There's more," Abigail said, hesitation in her voice. "A cavalry officer came to town yesterday, Captain Reynolds from Fort Apache. He was asking questions about you specifically." "What kind of questions?" "About your background, your character. Whether anyone thought you were being held against your will." Abigail paused. "He left a message. He'll be visiting the settlement tomorrow and would like to speak with you privately. He suggested he might offer a solution to your situation." Elizabeth frowned. "What situation? I'm here by choice." "I know that," Abigail said gently. "But the Army and the Indian Bureau see it differently. There's talk of new regulations explicitly forbidding white civilians from living among tribes without official authorization." That evening, Elizabeth found herself unable to focus on her usual journal writing. Instead, she spread the letters from Boston before her, reading and rereading them as if they might offer some clearer direction. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. Maka stood at her door, snowflakes dusting his dark hair. "Abigail told me about your letters," he said. "May I come in?" Elizabeth nodded, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of receiving him alone after dark. Yet such considerations seemed trivial given the circumstances. "You have inherited property in Boston," Maka stated, his eyes falling on the letters. "Yes, nothing grand, but enough to live independently." "A fortunate development," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Especially now." Something in his tone made Elizabeth look up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The timing provides you an honorable exit from a difficult situation." Maka stood with his back to the fire, shadows playing across his face. "The Army and the Bureau would not prevent your departure." "You think I should leave?" Elizabeth felt a strange hollowness in her chest. "I think you must consider your future practically." His words were measured, his expression unreadable. "Your presence here has always been temporary, an arrangement of mutual benefit. Now circumstances change for us both." "Is that all it was? An arrangement?" Elizabeth challenged, rising to face him. Something flickered in Maka's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or resignation. "What else could it be, Elizabeth? My people face forced relocation. Your government makes it clear you have no place among us. And now, you have the means to return to your world." "My world." The words tasted bitter. "I found more purpose, more belonging here than I ever did in Boston. Purpose that will end when soldiers come to escort us to San Carlos." Maka's voice hardened. "I cannot protect my people and worry about your safety too." The statement stung like a slap. "I never asked for your protection. Yet you have it, whether asked for or not." His voice softened slightly. "Captain Reynolds will come tomorrow. He is known to be more reasonable than most. Listen to what he offers. For your own sake." Before she could respond, Maka turned to leave. At the door he paused. "Whatever you decide, know that you have taught my sons well. They will carry your lessons with them, wherever they must go." The words sounded like goodbye. After he left, Elizabeth sat by the fire until it burned to embers, the letters from Boston lying forgotten on the table. Captain Reynolds arrived mid-morning, his manner more courteous than Lieutenant Davis had been. After inspecting the settlement and speaking briefly with Maka, he requested a private conversation with Elizabeth. "Miss Harmon," he began once they were alone in her cabin, "I understand you've received news of an inheritance in Boston." Elizabeth's surprise must have shown on her face. "Small communities have few secrets," the captain explained. "I believe this development offers an opportunity to resolve several difficulties at once." "What difficulties exactly?" Elizabeth asked warily. "Your position here is increasingly untenable," Reynolds said bluntly. "New regulations will soon explicitly prohibit arrangements like yours. Furthermore, this band's situation is precarious. If you were to depart voluntarily, I could use my influence to secure better terms for their relocation." "Better terms?" Elizabeth repeated skeptically. "A more favorable location within San Carlos. Additional rations. Perhaps most importantly, they would be kept together as a band rather than dispersed among other tribes." Reynolds leaned forward. "I cannot prevent their removal, Miss Harmon, but I can mitigate its harshness. In exchange for my leaving." "Precisely. Your continued presence complicates matters and antagonizes certain officials who see it as inappropriate." Elizabeth spent a sleepless night after Captain Reynolds' departure, his offer weighing heavily on her mind. By dawn, a plan had begun to form. Unlikely, perhaps even foolish, but the only path she could see that didn't require abandoning the people who had become her family. When she approached Maka with her request to travel to town, he agreed with visible reluctance. "I need to respond to these letters," Elizabeth explained, not yet ready to share her nascent plan. "And there are legal matters that require attention." 2 days later, they rode into Copper Springs together, an arrival that drew stares and whispers from the townspeople. Elizabeth held her head high, acutely aware of Maka's dignified presence beside her. Their first stop was Abigail's store, where Elizabeth changed from her travel clothes into her most formal dress. A navy blue wool with modest lace at the collar that she'd brought from Boston and seldom worn since. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman who stared back seemed a stranger, too stiff, too constrained. "You look very proper," Abigail observed, helping with the buttons. "I need to make an impression," Elizabeth replied, pinning her hair into a severe knot. Their next destination was the office of Mr. Hargrove, the town's only lawyer. The small wooden building sat between the bank and the land office, its weathered sign proclaiming legal services in faded paint. Hargrove himself proved to be younger than Elizabeth expected, perhaps 35, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His surprise at seeing Chief Maka enter his office was quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Miss Harmon, Chief Maka, how may I assist you today?" Elizabeth placed her uncle's letters on the desk. "I need to respond to an inheritance matter, and I have other legal questions as well." For the next hour, Hargrove guided her through the necessary paperwork to claim her inheritance. "You're not returning to Boston?" he asked when she explained her intention to have the property sold and the proceeds transferred to the Copper Springs Bank. "No, my home is here now." Elizabeth glanced at Maka, who had remained largely silent, observing the proceedings with careful attention. With the inheritance paperwork completed, Elizabeth leaned forward. "Mr. Hargrove, I have a more complex legal question. Are you familiar with the relocation order for Chief Maka's band?" Hargrove's expression grew serious. "Yes, it's been the talk of the territory." "And are you familiar with laws regarding land ownership in this territory?" "Of course. Land law is half my practice." "Then I need to know, can I, as a single woman, purchase land here? And if so, can I determine who is permitted to live on that land?" Hargrove's eyebrows rose as he began to understand her direction. You can indeed purchase land, Miss Harmon. As for who lives on it, there are certain restrictions regarding Indian occupancy, but—" he paused, thinking. "It's complicated but not impossible." For the next 2 hours, they explored legal possibilities, Hargrove becoming increasingly engaged in the intellectual challenge. Maka, initially reluctant to hope, gradually joined the conversation, his knowledge of treaty law surprising the young lawyer. "There's precedent," Hargrove admitted, pulling a thick legal tome from his shelf. "In the Dakota Territory, a similar arrangement was upheld when challenged. Not identical circumstances, but close enough to build upon." By mid-afternoon, a plan had solidified. Elizabeth would use her inheritance to purchase land adjacent to the current Apache territory. Land that, coincidentally, had recently been listed for sale after a failed mining venture. "The timing is fortunate," Hargrove noted. "The mining company is eager to sell, and the land isn't particularly valuable for farming or ranching. Too rocky, but suitable for a settlement," Maka observed quietly. "Indeed, and while the relocation order applies to reservation land, privately owned property falls under different legal jurisdiction." Hargrove removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "It won't be simple. There will be challenges, possibly legal battles. But it creates a position from which to negotiate." As they left Hargrove's office with a stack of preliminary paperwork, Elizabeth felt a cautious optimism. "It could work," she said softly to Maka as they walked toward the land office. "Perhaps," he replied, his usual caution evident. "But at great cost to you." "Not so great," Elizabeth countered. "My uncle's legacy would just sit in a Boston bank otherwise, benefiting no one." Their appearance at the land office caused a stir. Mr. Finch, the clerk, nearly dropped his pen when Chief Maka ducked through the doorway behind Elizabeth. "We're interested in the old Sullivan mining claim," Elizabeth stated, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. "I understand it's for sale." Finch stammered through the particulars. 160 acres, including a year-round spring, available for $1,200 due to the failed mining operation. The price would consume most of Elizabeth's inheritance, but it was fair for the size and water rights. As Finch prepared the initial paperwork, Mayor Hollister burst through the door, his face flushed with anger or drink, possibly both. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. "You can't sell land to Indians." "I'm not," Finch replied nervously. "Miss Harmon is the purchaser, and she's buying it for him." Hollister jabbed a finger toward Maka. "It's obvious what's happening here." "I'm purchasing land as a private citizen," Elizabeth said calmly. "What I do with my property afterward is my affair." "This is a scheme to circumvent the relocation order," Hollister sputtered. "I won't have it." "There's nothing illegal about the transaction," Elizabeth replied, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "Unless you're suggesting Mr. Finch should refuse to sell to me because I'm a woman?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the awkward position Hollister found himself in. Several other customers in the office watched the confrontation with undisguised interest. "This isn't over," Hollister warned, storming out. "The army won't stand for this trickery." Despite the interruption, the initial land paperwork was completed by late afternoon. Full transfer would take time, but Elizabeth had established her claim. As they mounted their horses to return to the settlement, Maka finally spoke the concern that had clearly been troubling him. "You've risked everything," he said. "Your inheritance, your standing with your own people. If this fails, then we'll find another way," Elizabeth interrupted. "I made my choice, Maka. I choose your people. I choose." She hesitated, then finished simply, "I choose this life." In the fading light, something in his expression shifted, the careful diplomatic mask giving way to a glimpse of the man beneath, moved beyond words by her commitment. They rode out of town as the sun touched the western mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Behind them, Elizabeth knew Hollister would be gathering allies, preparing resistance. Ahead lay uncertainty and struggle. Yet as they rode side by side through the winter landscape, Elizabeth felt a strange peace. For the first time since receiving her uncle's letters, the path ahead seemed clear. Word of Elizabeth's land purchase spread through the Apache settlement like wildfire. By nightfall, Maka had called a full council meeting, the first time every adult member of the band had gathered since the relocation order arrived. The council dwelling was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Elizabeth sat beside Nazca, acutely aware of being the only non-Apache present yet feeling strangely at home among these faces that had become familiar over the months. Maka opened the council with traditional prayers, then explained the situation in clear terms: the relocation order, the looming deadline, and the potential alternative Elizabeth's land purchase offered. Miss Harmon has purchased land that borders our current territory, he explained. Land with water and shelter possibilities. Land that is not subject to the relocation order because it is privately owned. Murmurs ran through the gathering as people processed this information. Nazca leaned toward Elizabeth, her wrinkled hand gripping Elizabeth's with surprising strength. "You spend all your money?" she asked in halting English. Elizabeth nodded. "Most of it. It seemed the right thing to do." Nazca's dark eyes studied her face. "Why?" The simple question deserved an honest answer. "Because this is my home now. You are my family." The old woman nodded once, satisfied, and turned her attention back to the council proceedings. A heated debate had erupted, with opinions divided on how to respond to the situation. Some of the younger men, including Nakohi, argued for resisting the relocation order directly, by force if necessary. "Better to die on our own land than live as prisoners elsewhere," Nakohi declared passionately. Others, particularly elders who remembered previous conflicts with the army, counseled caution. "Fighting brings only death," an elderly man argued. "The soldiers have many guns, many men." A third faction suggested fleeing deeper into the mountains, abandoning the settlement for more remote areas where officials might not pursue them. Elizabeth listened, recognizing the gravity of the choice before them. These were not abstract political positions but survival strategies for an entire community. When Maka finally gestured for her to speak, Elizabeth rose, suddenly nervous before so many intent faces. "The land I've purchased offers a possible legal alternative," she explained, her voice growing steadier as she continued. "As private property, it falls outside the reservation system. I can legally invite anyone I choose to live there." She unfolded a rough map Hargrove had provided, showing how the purchased land connected to their current territory. "It includes the western slopes and the year-round spring," she continued. "There's a natural shelter area here where dwellings could be constructed." Questions came rapidly about legal protections, about army response, about practicalities of moving the settlement. Elizabeth answered as honestly as she could, acknowledging the uncertainties and risks. "This is not a perfect solution," she admitted. "The government may still challenge it, but it creates time and legal standing to fight the relocation order." As the discussion continued, a messenger arrived with unexpected news. Abigail was approaching the settlement. Maka paused the council as Abigail was escorted in, snow dusting her heavy coat, her expression urgent. "I came as quickly as I could," she explained, accepting a cup of hot tea with gratitude. "There's something you should know. Mayor Hollister met with Indian Agent Wiggins right after you left town. They were joined by a man named Sullivan." "The former mine owner?" Elizabeth asked, remembering the name from the land paperwork. Abigail nodded. "Hollister has been working with him for months. They've suspected there might be gold on that property after all. Not where Sullivan was digging, but deeper in the eastern section." The revelation sent another wave of murmurs through the council. Maka's expression darkened. "They plan to challenge the sale," Abigail continued. "Sullivan claims he didn't intend to sell mineral rights, only surface rights. It's nonsense legally, but they're preparing paperwork. That explains Hollister's reaction, Elizabeth said, pieces falling into place. This isn't just about preventing Apache settlement. It's about greed. The council debated this new information intensely. Some saw it as proof that resistance was futile, others as confirmation that the land must indeed be valuable and worth fighting for. As night deepened, Maka called for a final decision. After much discussion, a consensus emerged. They would pursue Elizabeth's legal strategy while simultaneously preparing both for potential relocation and for resistance if necessary. No single approach would be abandoned until proven impossible. With the decision made, the council gradually dispersed. Elizabeth remained behind, studying the map by the light of the central fire, marking potential building sites for a new settlement. She became aware of Maka watching her, his expression thoughtful. When the last council members had left, he spoke. "You have given us hope where there was little," he said quietly, "at great personal cost." "Not so great," Elizabeth replied. "I've gained far more than I've given up." Maka moved to sit beside her, closer than propriety might dictate, but such considerations seemed meaningless now. "There is another matter we must discuss," he said, his voice taking on a formal quality. "Your legal strategy creates protection for the land, but your position among us remains vulnerable. Wiggins and others will continue to challenge your presence." "I've considered that," Elizabeth admitted, "but I won't be intimidated into leaving. There is another option." Maka's dark eyes held hers steadily. "One that would strengthen both your position and our legal claim to remain." Elizabeth's heart quickened as she began to understand his direction. "Marriage," he said simply. "Between us." The word hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. "A legal union would give you standing as a member of the band," Maka continued, his voice carefully neutral, "and would reinforce our right to live on your land as family." "Is that the only reason you suggest this?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Something shifted in Maka's expression, the diplomatic mask slipping to reveal vulnerability rarely displayed. "No," he answered softly, "but it would be reason enough if it were." Elizabeth studied his face in the firelight, the strong features she had come to know so well, the quiet dignity that had first impressed her, the depth of character revealed over months of shared challenges. "If you need time to consider," he began. "I don't," Elizabeth interrupted. "My answer is yes." The simplicity of her response seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the careful chief gave way to the man beneath, surprise and joy briefly visible before his composure returned. "You understand what this means?" he asked. "The town, the territory, they will not look kindly on such a union." "I stopped caring about their approval long ago," Elizabeth replied. "My life is here now, with you, with our people." Maka reached slowly for her hand, the gesture tentative despite the magnitude of the commitment they had just made. When their fingers intertwined, Elizabeth felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the uncertainty surrounding them. "Tomorrow," Maka said, "we will tell the others. There will be preparations, ceremonies, and legal paperwork," Elizabeth added with a small smile, "to make it official in both our worlds." Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the silent settlement with fresh white. Inside, beside the dying fire, two people from different worlds held onto one shared future. Uncertain, dangerous, but chosen freely and with clear eyes. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Elizabeth divided her time between preparing legal documents with Hargrove's assistance and learning the Apache wedding traditions from a patient but insistent Nazca. Maka coordinated plans to begin constructing dwellings on the newly purchased land while maintaining vigilant scouts to warn of any approaching officials. Elizabeth's wedding attire emerged as a striking blend of cultures. A simple white dress Abigail helped sew, adorned with intricate Apache beadwork and symbolic designs Nazca insisted upon. Each bead, each pattern carried meaning. Strength, fertility, wisdom, protection. You will be bridge between worlds, Nazca explained as she worked on the beading. Dress should show this. Meanwhile, Hargrove had submitted their legal challenge to the relocation order, citing the band's right to live on Elizabeth's private property as invited residents. The strategy created a temporary reprieve as officials were forced to consider the legal implications. It won't stop them forever, Hargrove warned during a visit to the settlement. But it buys time and establishes grounds for negotiation. The wedding was planned for the next full moon, giving both legal and ceremonial preparations time to mature. Elizabeth found herself touched by the community's growing enthusiasm. Women who had once regarded her with suspicion now included her in traditional preparations. Even Nakohi had grudgingly presented her with a finely crafted leather pouch, a traditional gift from a son to his father's bride. 3 days before the wedding, the settlement's peaceful preparations shattered with the arrival of Lieutenant Davis and a full detachment of cavalry soldiers. Behind them rode Wiggins and Mayor Hollister, their expressions triumphant. "We have orders to begin the relocation process immediately," Davis announced, presenting Maka with an official document. "The legal challenge has been rejected." Elizabeth stepped forward. "On what grounds?" "We filed all the proper paperwork." Wiggins smirked. "The land sale itself has been invalidated, Miss Harmon. Mr. Sullivan has submitted an affidavit claiming he was misled about mineral rights." "That's absurd," Elizabeth protested. "The sale was completely transparent." "Nevertheless, the territorial judge has issued a temporary stay on the transfer," Wiggins continued smugly. "And without valid ownership of that land, your legal challenge to the relocation collapses." Maka studied the documents, his expression giving nothing away. "How convenient that this judge acted so quickly, and without hearing our side." "The judge understands the urgency of implementing Indian policy," Wiggins replied. "Now you have 2 hours to begin packing essential items. Wagons will arrive tomorrow for transport to San Carlos." The situation appeared hopeless, but Elizabeth refused to surrender. "We'll appeal to the federal courts," she insisted. "This is a clear case of corruption and prejudice." "Appeals take time, Miss Harmon," Lieutenant Davis said, almost sympathetically. "Time your friends will spend at San Carlos." As the officials conferred outside, the Apache gathered in urgent council. Options dwindled rapidly. The soldiers were too numerous to fight, the weather too harsh for flight into the mountains, the legal channels apparently blocked. In this darkest moment, an unexpected ally arrived. Captain Reynolds rode into the settlement, accompanied by Hargrove and, surprisingly, 3 prominent ranchers from the territory. "Lieutenant Davis," Reynolds called, his authority immediately evident. "I've received troubling reports about this operation." What followed was a tense confrontation between the 2 officers. Reynolds produced documentation showing irregularities in the judge's ruling and evidence suggesting collusion between Hollister, Sullivan, and Judge Parker regarding mining interests. "This isn't about Indian policy," Reynolds stated firmly. "It's about gold speculation. And I won't have the U.S. Army used as pawns in a land grab." Hargrove stepped forward with additional papers. "I've filed an emergency petition with the territorial governor, documenting the conflict of interest. He's granted a 60-day stay on any relocation pending full investigation." Hollister's face reddened with rage. "This is outrageous. These savages can't be allowed." "Careful, Mayor," one of the ranchers interrupted. "Some of us find your methods more savage than anything we've seen from the Apache." Elizabeth recognized the speaker as Mr. Coleman, whose daughter had once attended her school. Beside him stood Mr. Santiago and, most surprisingly, Mrs. Yazzie, Miguel's mother, who had evidently recruited the ranchers' support. "Chief Maka's band has been peaceful neighbors," Mr. Coleman continued. They've honored their agreements, which is more than I can say for some in town. The standoff continued until a compromise emerged. The relocation would be delayed pending proper legal review, but a small cavalry detachment would remain nearby to monitor the situation. As the various parties departed, leaving only Captain Reynolds to finalize details, Elizabeth and Maka exchanged a look of cautious relief. They had won a reprieve, not a final victory, but it was enough for now. We still have a wedding to prepare, Elizabeth said softly. 2 days later, under a brilliant full moon, Elizabeth stood beside Maka in the center of the settlement. She wore her white dress with Apache beadwork. He wore traditional ceremonial attire with the addition of a formal black vest acquired years ago during his education. The ceremony blended elements from both cultures, traditional Apache blessings and vows in both languages. Hargrove attended as official witness for the territorial marriage license, while Nazcha oversaw the Apache rituals. When Nakohi stepped forward to present the wedding blanket that would symbolically bind them together, his expression had lost its habitual resentment. "My father has chosen well," he said in careful English, loud enough for all to hear. "And so have you, Elizabeth Harmon. Welcome to our family." As the blanket was wrapped around their shoulders, joining them together, Elizabeth and Maka stood facing each other. No longer teacher-in-chief, white woman and Apache man, but partners in an uncertain future they had chosen to face together. The celebration continued into the night, with even a few townspeople, Abigail, the Santiagos, the Colemans, cautiously participating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to hope and possibility. 1 year later. Spring sunshine warmed the newly completed schoolhouse that stood precisely on the boundary between the original Apache settlement and Elizabeth's purchased land. The structure represented both compromise and victory, its eastern half on reservation land, its western half on private property, a physical manifestation of the legal arrangement that had finally been formalized after months of hearings and appeals. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, watching children file in for the afternoon lessons. The class had grown beyond her expectations. Not just Apache children now, but several Mexican children from nearby ranches and even 2 children from town whose parents had defied convention to seek better education than the new schoolmaster in Copper Springs provided. Mrs. Maka, called Maria Santiago, now 12 and one of Elizabeth's most dedicated students. "Will we continue our geography lesson today?" "Yes," Elizabeth replied, smiling at the formal use of her married name. "Today we'll learn about the eastern seaboard states." Inside, the schoolhouse blended practical frontier construction with traditional Apache elements. The main support beams were decorated with symbols representing knowledge and growth. Windows faced east and west, allowing light throughout the day. A small wood stove, donated by Abigail, provided warmth on cooler days. As Elizabeth began the lesson, she noticed Nakohi observing from the back of the room. Now 17, he had grown into a serious young man with his father's diplomatic abilities and a fierce dedication to his people's future. He attended lessons irregularly, but with purpose, preparing for his upcoming journey to Washington as part of a delegation of Western tribes. "The capital city we're discussing today is where you'll be going next month," Elizabeth noted, acknowledging his presence. Nakohi nodded. "I'm counting on your geography lessons to serve me well, Mother." The term still caught Elizabeth by surprise, though he had begun using it some months ago, not with the easy affection Tarak showed, but with measured respect that meant perhaps even more. After the children were dismissed, Elizabeth gathered her teaching materials. Her movements had grown more deliberate in recent months, accommodating her advancing pregnancy. She rested a hand on her rounded belly, feeling the child within shift and stretch. Outside, she found Tarak waiting to accompany her home. At 13, he had appointed himself her protector during Maka's frequent absences for tribal business. "Father has returned," he reported excitedly, with news from the territorial capital. They walked together through the expanded settlement. The past year had brought many changes, new dwellings constructed on Elizabeth's land. A small trading post operated jointly by Apache and Mexican families. Gardens expanded to include crops from seeds Abigail had special ordered from back east. Maka waited for them outside their home. A comfortable dwelling that, like the schoolhouse, incorporated elements from both cultures. His face, weathered by sun and responsibility, brightened at the sight of his wife and son. "The governor has signed the final agreement," he announced without preamble. "Our right to remain on this land is now recognized by territorial law. The reservation boundary has been officially redrawn to include both settlements as one protected community." "They've given up on relocating us?" Elizabeth asked, hardly daring to believe the long legal battle might truly be over. "Not given up," Maka clarified, "but accepted defeat in this instance. Captain Reynolds' evidence of corruption was too substantial to ignore. Judge Parker has been removed from the bench, and Mayor Hollister faces charges." The news left Elizabeth momentarily speechless. After a year of uncertainty, of alternating hope and despair, the resolution seemed almost anticlimactic. "What about Sullivan's mining claims?" Tarak asked, demonstrating his grasp of the complex situation. "Denied completely," Maka replied. "The land survey confirmed there is no significant gold deposit." He fabricated the claim entirely. That evening, friends and family gathered to celebrate. Nazcha, now moving more slowly but still formidable, directed younger women in preparing a feast. Abigail arrived with supplies from town and updates on the changing attitudes there. "Copper Springs is gradually accepting the new arrangement," she reported. "Having respectable ranchers like the Colemans supporting you has made a difference. And the trading post is bringing business that even Hollister's supporters can't ignore." As twilight deepened, Elizabeth and Maka stepped away from the celebration for a moment of privacy. They stood together on a small rise overlooking both settlements, now officially one community. "When I first came to your door that evening," Maka said softly, "I only hoped for a teacher for my sons. And I only hoped for a purpose after losing my position," Elizabeth replied, leaning against his shoulder. "We found so much more," he murmured, placing his hand gently over hers where it rested on her belly. The child within kicked vigorously, making them both smile. "The true bridge between worlds," Nazcha had called the unborn child during a blessing ceremony the previous month. Looking out over the peaceful settlement, Apache families and a few newcomers coexisting, children playing together regardless of background, traditional ways continuing alongside necessary adaptations. Elizabeth felt the truth of those words. As darkness fell and stars appeared above the mountains, Maka turned to Elizabeth with rare playfulness. "Do you remember what I said when I first came to your cabin?" Elizabeth smiled. "You said, 'My sons need guidance. You need a family.' I had no idea how right I was," Maka replied, drawing her close as they watched their extended family celebrate below them, two worlds gradually becoming one.